Okay, good afternoon everybody. You're very welcome here today to our fifth and final open day on Cloonamahon Native Woodland Park. It's great to see again such a great crowd here. We had a full house this morning as well. Everybody was really engaged in the project, so it's super to have you all here, so thanks for coming. My name is Marina Conway. I'm the CEO of Western Forestry Co-op, and also have here with me today Colin Dehaney, and Colin is the forest manager over Cloonamahon. And we have Tony at the back, who is actually recording the presentation because we got a lot of feedback that we should record it and put it up on the website for people who weren't able to come. So hopefully, because there's a lot of information about the new programme and that. So and then we also have Victor and Joe from the Harvesting team as well here today as well to learn about the project themselves. We brought all the staff out to show them the project. So just to give you a little brief outline of this afternoon, we're just going to do two short presentations. I'm going to cover the history and the background to Cloonamahon, the project, how it happened, who the partners are, and I'm going to cover some information about the new forestry strategy and the forestry programme and all the different options that have been put out there. And then Colin is going to talk about the project itself. We'll have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions and answers, and then we grab a quick cup of tea, and we can have more questions and answers down in the room, and then we'll go on a tour of the woodland, and we'll show you out in the field all the different operations that went on to create the Cloonamahon Native Woodland Park. So just a little, hope this works now. Yes. So just a little background to Western Forestry Co-op, who we are. So we were established back in 1985 by the then main 7 dairy co-ops and livestock markets in the west of Ireland. We were formed in response to a need to empower farmers to plant their own land. So very much at the time when the first grants and premiums were brought out for farmers, they weren't necessarily being taken up by farmers because we lost a lot of our traditions and skills around forests and creating forests and managing forests. So as the cooperative model works really well in rural Ireland, the co-op was formed in order to empower them, to provide them with the advice and the skills and all the support that they would need to plant their own land. Because we very much believe that we want to keep the people on the land, the farmers on the land, we want to keep the farmers with the trees, and we think that, you know, that all the benefits associated with trees and woodlands, that they work really well being kept in local communities. Our current co-op shareholders are Revo, and I'm delighted to welcome one of our directors here today. Michael Kenny is with us in the audience, and also Lakeland Dairies, and Clare Co-op Marts, and Kerry Co-op. And we're the longest and largest established forestry cooperative in the country. The services we provide a range of services from all aspects of forest establishment, that be the creation of new woodlands through afforestation, and reforestation, which is the replanting of woodlands. All aspects of forest management, from your planning to your tending of your woodlands, any maintenance operations. We do neighbourhood schemes, which is community woodland projects. We organise field days. We do field days out with different forest owners on different sites that we're managing. We do open days like today on the Native Woodland Park, and we ran the Woodland Festival this year. It's the second time. We ran it in Leitrim in 2019, and we did it in Roscommon this year in August, for anybody who might have been at it. We do all aspects as well of forest roading and felling licence applications, harvesting, so thinning and clear fell management of your woodlands. We run a group forest insurance scheme and forest valuation. So we'd like to think that we're a one-stop shop for forestry to advise you on any of your forestry needs. So the HSE Cloonamahon facility, just to give you a bit of a background to the facility here itself today, it was originally a monastery and retreat centre with a church and a farm that was owned by the Passionist order until the early 2000s. They were a very progressive order, they were very self-sufficient, they ran a dairy herd here. I think they were doing silage for anybody else was doing silage, they grew all their own vegetables, so they were very self-sufficient. The HSE bought this facility in the early noughties, and it is now the head of the disability services for the Northwest region for the HSE. The Cloonamahon, when they purchased the site, it came with a land area of some 200 acres, of which now we have 105 acres of HSE land that's been converted to native woodland under the Woodland Creation of Public Land Scheme. And I would have to say, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the HSE for creating this native woodland park, for committing their land for this park to be created. They also own 27 acres of land that they retained, so all the fields at the front and the side and around the Cloonamahon buildings have all been retained. And there's approximately 55 acres of old native woodland over here to the west of the site that came with the land that we are putting into a native woodland conservation scheme in a neighbourhood, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And they also have approximately 13 acres of lake. So the Cloonamahon Native Woodland Park, it's fair to say it's the largest project of its scale in the country. There have been a couple of other projects done by some other state organisations, but nothing of this scale in the whole country. And when we were planning it out, the accessibility element of it was extremely important, especially to the HSE being here, being the head of the disability services for the Northwest. So when we were laying out the woodlands, the paths and the facilities and the access and the accessibility was really important to it. Now I think when you're walking today and you're walking around, it's very important to remember that this is just the start of what is going to be a huge project for the region. It's like a blank canvas. We have the woodland in, we have the facilities in. We've done a huge amount of work, but there is fantastic potential to add to this over time. But it also is Cloonamahon, like this started about a year and a half ago, and it's become a collaborative project between 4 key stakeholders. The key stakeholders are the HSE, of course, is the lead partner because they're the landowner. Again, they've committed their land for this native woodland park to be created. Since this happened, because we are so invested in it and believe in it, we are also now a neighbouring landowner. We are the forest managers of this project. We're the ones who get the work done. We do all the mapping, the applications, the licenses, the facilities, get all the work done. But we also, an adjoining farm of 23 acres came up for sale, and Western Forestry Co-op, we purchased it on the basis of adding to the park, which I will show you now in a minute. Quailshire are also a neighbouring landowner, and Sligo County Council, Quailshire are also a partner because they're a neighbouring landowner, but they have 15 acres of commercial thick spruce woodland, which I'll show you on the next one, which was adjacent to the park. They've recently clear-felled this year, and they're transitioning that to native woodland, and they're also going to put the facilities in it as well. And then finally, the fourth partner to the project is Sligo County Council, because we're very important. This is a very important project now for the county with regard to community recreation and tourism. So Sligo County Council have also been on board since the project started. And with that in mind, there's going to be a couple of phases to this project. I'm just going to talk about phase 1 and 2, but in the future we see phase 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's a whole load of different phases that's going to happen here. Not to repeat myself, but it is absolutely the art of the possible what we can build on this. So phase 1 is the creation of the native woodland park. 105 acres of native woodland has been planted, along with approximately 4 kilometres of trails, 4 picnic areas, seating. There's an outdoor forest playground has been installed, habitat and information signs, and a tree trail throughout the park. Phase 2 is the native woodland that I mentioned. So over here to the west, there is approximately between 30 and 50 acres of old woodland. We have put that into the Native Woodland Conservation Scheme, where we're going to go in and do some very sensitive light enhancement works in the woodland. That means maybe remove any exotic or native or invasive species, opening it up if it needs to be, and maybe doing a small bit of underplanting. We also intend to put a neighbourhood project then on top of that, which will allow us to open up the woodland again with maybe a few trails, and with fencing and with seats in areas, and it'll connect into the overall native woodland park. Quailshire are going to replant their area with native woodland and amenities, and then Sligo County Council, again as a key stakeholder, it's linking into their plans. So as most of you would know, Cloonamahon is going to be the new hub for the Greenway. And it's the Greenway for the Sligo to, I don't have all this correct, so somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but it'll be going in a southerly direction towards Galway, but it's also going to link in with the Sligo-Leitrim North Corridor Railway as well. So it's going to come from both sides, and Cloonamahon is the hub for these new greenways. And also, as part of the N4 upgrade that was done outside, there is now a cycleway and a walkway all the way from Cloonamahon already out to Cloonamahon. So it's already linked for people to be able to use from a recreational and amenity perspective. So just to give you an idea what this actually looks like on a map, here in the blue, that is the native woodland park that we have just planted and created. and with all the trails, and Colin will go through that in more detail with all the facilities on it. This is the area of old woodlands that I mentioned and the lakes. This is the area of that Quilcha Clearfield. You'll see the sickle spruce, that's all gone now. That's what they are transitioning to native woodland. And this is Dorla. This is the farm that we have purchased. So what we intend to do here is that we're going to create a model forest. You might have seen on the pieces of paper that we left out that there's now 12 different forest creation types proposed in the new forestry programme. So as part of that, what we aim to do is to put a lot of these different types of forests and woodlands, everything from native woodland to commercial conifer woodland to agroforestry, the ESB lines here, agroforestry at the front, to under the ESB lines Christmas trees, the different mixtures, continuous cover forestry plots, forestry garden. We're basically going to create many types of woodlands, a mosaic of woodland types, so that we can bring farmers in and use this as a model forest, a demonstration area to show them the different types of woodland creation that is possible and how that will be managed over time. But we will also then have a network of paths throughout this, and we have a bridge from Cloonamahon into Dorla so that people can come in then as well and visit the model forest and see the different types. And then in here there was an old farmhouse which we are intending to build our new head office out of wood there, in an old Irish barn style, but completely out of wood, because we also want to showcase what's possible building with wood and what's possible building with Irish wood. So that's the future plan. And again, so at the moment now, we're already in excess of 200 acres now for our native woodland park. And I'm delighted to say a good few of the neighbouring landowners have already been at our open days over the last few days. It's really piquing the interest of people. I know a man who is maybe a couple of miles further down here has got a lot of woodland, and he's interested about his woodland and how it connects in, or how many other neighbours connect in. So it's really starting to I suppose, expand and grow out. So I'm just going to cover a little bit about the whole new forest strategy implementation plan that's out for consultation at the moment. A huge amount of work has been going on over the last couple of years through Project Woodland in creating a shared national vision for the country. So what do people want from our forests for the next 50 or 100 years? This has culminated in a forest strategy being compiled and for the next, for 2022 to 2030. And as part of that forest strategy, there is a forest strategy implementation plan. That implementation plan basically becomes the next forestry programme. It's this document. It's out for public consultation at the moment until the 29th of November, where people can go through it. The strategy is at the front, and the forestry programme is the main vehicle to implement that strategy, to create the different types of woodland, but also provides a lot of support for how we manage our woodlands. There's a very strong climate, biodiversity and environment focus in the new forestry programme, and a lot of that has come out of the shared national vision and the public consultation process that has been undertaken. So this culminates in our Forest Action Plan, which is the suite of forestry programme actions and non-programme actions, which I'm going to go through with you there now. So just to let you know, give you an idea of the amount of public consultation that has gone on to try and develop this shared vision and forest strategy. There's been a public attitude survey undertaken face-to-face with 1,000 adults. Irish Rural Link sent out 6,000 questionnaires to their community members. There's been a youth forum dialogue on forestry. There was an online survey that was out for public consultation. There's been a Citizens Deliberative Dialogue Day, which is a 2-day event with 99 people. And then there's also been a huge amount of bilateral consultation going on with key stakeholders, 28 in total, which covers everything from, I would assume, a lot of the public sector that's here today, and local government will be a part of that, National Parks and Wildlife, the EPA, environmental NGOs, farmers, farming organisations, farmers groups, everything across the spectrum. There has been a lot of dialogue going on trying to culminate in this vision. And then you would have seen last week that we've had the biggest ever announcement for forestry in this country, a huge commitment by government that they have committed 1.3 billion investment in Irish forestry over the next 7 years. So that's from 2023 to 2030, that there's a 1.3 billion investment in tree planting by the Irish government. Tree planting and support measures, it's not all tree planting. But as part of that, there has been a huge increase in premiums for planting trees. So now they have been increased from an average of 46 to 66%, and delighted to see that the premium payment has been extended to 20 years for farmers. If you're a non-farmer, you get it for 15 years, but if you're a farmer, you get it for 20 years. So these are all really great positives for forestry, a really good time to be involved with trees and to be planting more trees in this country. So as part of the proposed forestry programme, they're basically listed 8 broad intervention topics. I'm not going to try and cover them all today because I'll definitely lose you or put you all to sleep, but I will try and I'll focus on a couple of them: the forest creation and agroforestry measures. I'll focus on the open forest measure, which is all about the community recreational aspect of it, and I'll talk a little bit about climate resilient reforestation. Here under the reconstitution option is where the ash dieback scheme sits when there's damage from frost or drought or floods, any natural occurrence that will damage a forest, that there is support here for forest owners and farmers if their forests are damaged. So just to talk you through now the different forest creation types that are available. So there's 12, the FT stands for forest types, so there's 12 different forest types. The first one is native woodlands. It's for the creation of native woodlands on your farm. Again, 20 years for a farmer, 15 for a non-farmer, and the premium has been increased to €1,100 a hectare. The second option, forest for water. Forest for water is very much aimed at areas where water pressure is a high sensitivity. So this will be like on the EPA PIP maps, the pollution impact potential maps, areas that are identified on that, areas that have been identified by the local authority, areas that have been identified under pressure through the ASSEPS programme, which is the Dairy Sustainability Programme. I'll read some of them out here. Areas identified by local authorities, water programme, local catchment assessments, Office of Public Works as suitable for nature-based solutions, areas identified by the Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advice Programme, areas identified by inland fisheries as suitable for forest creation, and areas contiguous with annex alluvial woodland habitat. So again, this is all about creating forests that are going to protect water quality, that these forests are going to be an integral part of the farm, and that they're really going to, in these areas where it's been identified that these water bodies are under pressure, that there's going to be a high reward to encourage people. It's the highest premium that's available, $1,142 a hectare for 20 years. But also, there is a once-off payment for anybody who's into the forest and water measure of €1,000 a hectare as well. A once-off payment, plus then you get your premium for 20 years. And just to mention, the premiums are tax-free, so you don't pay any income tax on any premiums that you get, or you don't pay income tax on your returns from timber, but you do pay USC and PRSI because nothing is exempt, I'm afraid, from USC and PRSI. So the next measure is forests on public lands. So that would be, this is what Cloonamahon was done through, woodland creation on public lands. Obviously it doesn't attract a premium because it's a state body. So this is only for state bodies, and it's about the creation of native woodlands on public lands. I'll go into that in more detail later. We have the amenity forests and neighbourhoods. So this is for public, for private land. This is for people, we've done a good few of these with community groups in the areas who would have inherited land. And there's 3 measures to it. You can, it's for the creation of new woodlands, and if a landowner creates a new woodland, they'll get that premium. Then there's also an element within it to put the facilities on top of it. And if you have old woodland, there's grant support there as well for you to go in and to do rejuvenation works in the woodland to open it up for amenity and recreation, and I'll show you a bit of that later on. This is a new forest type that has just come out, which I think has got great potential. It's called the emergent woodland rewilding. So this basically is for areas of scrub or new woodland that is starting to emerge in your farm. Heretofore, we would have often had to map these out of an application because it wouldn't have been seen technically as bare land. But the beauty of this is now that these will actually become an integral part of the forest area, and that we can include them, and then that they attract a payment of €350 for 20 years. So as I said before, it would have been removed, whereas now it becomes an integral part of the forest, which is hugely important because it adds to it. So these are areas that you would often just leave it and let it continue to self-seed and let it continue to regenerate, and I think it's very small intervention that goes on without it. The next forest type is the 6 and 7 is for broadleaf. So a higher category for oak, and then birch alder. That's your oak beech category, and this is your birch alder for growing your commercial broadleaves. Agroforestry is now being increased from 5 to 10 years and attracts a premium of 975 per hectare. Seed orchards is, I don't know a huge amount about this, but I think it's very much for creating areas where you're going to be putting in superior genetic material to grow on and to create seed for the planting programme. CCF means continuous cover forestry. This is basically about planning out your forest at the start, that you're going to have a diverse mixture of species and you're going to manage it on a continuous canopy basis. So it's more managed along the lines of close to nature forestry principles. You'll never be going in and doing a clear cut. You're continuously managing it for timber production, and you're taking out timber all the time, but you're also facilitating natural regeneration as well. You're encouraging the forest to be self-sufficient and you're managing it in such a way for that way. And then the final two measures are our commercial conifers. So our Scots pine, which is a native Irish conifer, and Douglas fir. And then this was our former GPC3, which is mainly Sitka spruce. All Sitka spruce forests now will have a 20% element of broadleaf. Sorry, this one will as well. But of native broadleaf, a 20% element of native broadleaf. And that's gone from €510 a hectare to 746, and again a 20-year premium. So just to give you a quick idea what this means in a numbers perspective. So in the old programme, if you planted 10 hectares of Sitka spruce over the 15 years, it will be worth 76,500 to you. If you now plant that same 10 hectares of Sitka spruce, although you'll have go from 15% broadleaf to 20% broadleaf, but you now get it for 20 years, and the payment goes from 76,500 to 149,000. So it's nearly doubled. It's quite significant. The same for the native woodland category, GPC 9 and 10. It was €665 a hectare. Over the 15 years, if you planted 10 hectares, it was worth nearly 100,000 to you. If you plant that same 10 hectares today, or well, actually from 1 January onwards, that native woodland will now be worth 220,000 to you over the 10 years. So again, a significant increase of over 120,000. And I'm delighted to see that, because our commercial woodlands will have a return. They have timber production. Our native woodland, there is a timber production function in it, but it's a tertiary function. It's not the main function. Their main function is a lot of their function is habitat, biodiversity creation, soil water protection. And it's really great that because they provide a really important public good. And I'm glad to see that that public good is being recognised in the highest premium payment that is available. So the woodland creation on public lands, I think this is what will hopefully be of interest to a lot of people who are here from local authorities or state bodies. This is what Cloonamahon was done through this scheme. So it's the woodland creation on public lands is for native woodlands on state land. So native woodlands only on state land. It was a key measure within the Climate Action Plan to try and help the government reach their target of 8,000 hectares per year. As part of it, there is 3 elements. There's an establishment grant, which covers the cost of the trees, the planting, the site, the maintenance, the fencing. There's a facilities grant, which covers the cost of the trails and the seats, the signs and tree trail information. And there's also a forest playground grant then as well to put in an outdoor playground, which we've put in Cloonamahon, and we'll show you. And then there actually is a 4th measure, which we didn't have to use here, but it might be important for local authorities to know. It's called a reclamation grant. So it's up to €500 a hectare if you had land that was formerly a quarry, or it hadn't been used, it's not agricultural land, and you needed to do remediation works to get that in a suitable condition for growing trees. That's a support there for €500 a hectare to bring that in as well. So that's, and there's a proposed increase in the grants of 20% in the new programme. So, as we all know, our woodlands provide really important ecosystem services. I might open that a little bit warm in here. I need to. So our woodlands provide really important ecosystem functions. They store carbon, so they literally clean the air that we breathe. They take carbon out of the air, they store it in the wood, and they release oxygen back into the atmosphere. So they provide, everybody be very familiar with the importance of trees with regard to carbon storage. They help clean our water, protect our water, and they protect our soils. They provide close to nature amenities. Everybody realised in COVID how important it was to get out into woodlands and to have these spaces to go to. They create habitats and they protect existing habitats. They are a reserve for wildlife. And they also provide wood fuel and timber. The carbon storage at Cloonamahon. So we used forest carbon tool that was developed by Teagasc in order to come up with the carbon values. So it's most aligned to birch alder woodland. It sequesters approximately 3.5 tons of CO2 per hectare per annum, which includes energy substitution and harvested wood. Energy substitution means because you're not using fossil fuels, you're using timber instead, and harvested wood products is like the wood we have here in our homes and our farms and our buildings, where the carbon is locked up and stored in the wood products that we make from it. So 3.5 tons from birch alder woodland and oak woodland. If it was pure oak woodland, it's about 1.9 tons per hectare per annum. So carbon is directly linked to volume. So the slower the tree grows, I suppose, the less carbon that it stores. But it doesn't mean that it won't store as much, it just takes a longer time to do it. So birch and alder will grow at a much quicker speed generally than oak. So they put on a lot more volume quickly and therefore they store more carbon. So there's approximately 80 tons of CO2 being sequestered here in Cloonamahon. And I guess it's just to say that, of course, forest sinks are a really important part of our climate change obligations. Also, how we manage our forests is a very important part of our climate change obligations. But just to mention, whereas they are hugely important in everything going forward, of course, we recognise that they're not the only solution. There's a lot that we all need to be doing. Just to talk to you a little bit about this native tree area scheme, this is important for landowners and forest owners. It could also be important for public bodies and local authorities with smaller areas. This basically, you would have seen the Minister announced last year, or the legislation went through the door, to exempt less than 1 hectare of native woodland from the requirement of a licence. But it will still need a consent through this native tree area scheme. So basically this is for the creation of 2 types of woodland. It's creation of small native forests on existing farms. So you might have a farm where you might want to put in an acre to screen out your sheds, to shelter your animals, for landscaping, maybe for corners, for habitat, to create an ecological corridor from one area of your farm to another. So you can plant up to 1 hectare of this NTA1, which is creation of small native forests. And then the second one is native forest for water protection. It's like this, you might have a stream, or you might have a river, a lake, you might have relevant water courses, a drain but has a lot of water flowing in it, that you will create these native forests alongside your water courses. And that they're there, you will have a setback, and then that you will have an undisturbed setback, and you'll have the native trees planted there that's going to protect and enhance the water, the overland flow. It's going to catch a lot of it, and it's in a way, you're nearly creating a native forest that's becoming like a sump, like an area where any kind of overland flow or nutrients are hopefully going to be caught in this area before that they would reach the stream. So the native tree area scheme premiums, they're different to the forest creation in that they're going to be paid over 10 years. So they're front loaded as such. So for the small native forest on farmland, it's 2,206 per hectare per annum, and for the small native forest for water protection, it's 2,284 per hectare annually. So basically, if you opted for this, it's up to 22,800 over 10 years, and that doesn't include the establishment grant. So there is also a grant to cover the cost of planting these woodlands and trees, and then also there is an annual premium. This is a real way as well. I think a huge part of this is to encourage a lot of farmers maybe to get involved in forestry and to use forestry to enhance their farm.
You know, the first part there, NTA1, is there a minimum acreage or how much?
So no, it's 0.1. I think 0.1 would be the minimum, but up to a hectare maximum. And it must be a maximum of 20 metres wide, but it can be less, of trees. You'd have a 10 metre setback, and this would be a maximum of 20 metres wide, but it could be a bit less if it needs to be. Okay, so forests and CAP, just to cover a bit about forests and CAP. CAP is the Common Agricultural Policy, the main vehicle for support for farming in this country. and across the EU. So the forestry programme period follows the CAP programme. So the forestry programme will be from 2023 to 2027, exactly the same as the CAP. If the CAP is extended, the forestry programme will be extended. They always follow each other. Just to mention that existing and new forests that are planted will qualify for the BIS. The BIS is the Basic Income Sustainability Support. It's your former BPS, your former single farm payment, your entitlements. So basically you can get your entitlements and forestry on the same land. And then also to mention that the organic farming scheme, that parcels that you can move, so if you're in organics and for some reason your circumstances change and you decide it's better for you to plant that 10 acres, maybe it wasn't working out farm-wise, it was too difficult, and you wanted to consider foresting that 10 acres, that you can move from the organic scheme into afforestation without incurring any penalty. So that's hugely important. The same here with the acre scheme. So the acres is the new agri-environment scheme. It's called the Agri-Climate Rural Environment Scheme, but it's the precursor to REPS and GLAS and GLAMS. So acres is the new agri-environment scheme. So again, some really, really good measures in this for forestry and some great support. Delighted to say that anyone who has existing native woodland or agroforestry on their farm will get Tier 2 priority entry into acres. So if you have existing native woodland or agroforestry on your farm, you get priority entry into acres. Also very happy that there was some good measures in here for acres and forestry, that you can now split parcels for afforestation in acres. Heretofore, if you had opted for certain linear features, I might just move that stool out because otherwise thank you. If you had picked, let's say maybe to put in a hedgerow and your parcel was a 10-acre field, before your whole 10-acre parcel would have been sterilised from being able to go into forestry or another scheme. Whereas now a linear or point feature can be mapped out, and then if you wanted, if it suited you to afforest or create a woodland on 5 or 7 of those other acres, you can now do that, which is a great, that makes total sense. And then also, you can also now move from acres to afforestation without a penalty. So again, it allows flexibility of land management, flexibility of movement. Again, people's circumstances change for some reason, and the acre scheme might not be working for you anymore, and that you have the ability to move. You will have to finish out the year, and depending on the measure that you did, and forgo your future payments in acres, but you can move from the acre scheme to afforestation if you so wish without incurring a penalty. So that's a huge, a good important benefit from it as well. So I'm just going to cover some of the proposed forestry programme interventions. So this forest creation was the first one I just did. I just covered there for you. So just going to talk a little bit about the agroforestry systems that's in the new programme. So silvopastoral is basically the farming of animals and trees. So you can be grazing your sheep here. You can also be taking off your silage, and your trees are at a certain width that it's feasible to get mechanisation in to remove silage if you so need. The grant then covers the cost of the trees and the tree shelters and the maintenance to get them established. We have silvo-arable. This is new. I don't think this has been done anywhere in the country, so hopefully a few projects will come out of this. Basically the growing of crops and trees together as well, so that you can be growing your tillage crops and have your lines of trees. So, and just to mention that the trees that are planted through agroforestry will be targeted at better land, because it's about growing commercial broadleaves, it's about growing oak, it's about growing cherry, it's about growing walnut, it's about growing really high value commercial broadleaf trees, and you'll be pruning and managing these. There's also a 20% component of fruit and nut trees as well in it for biodiversity, but it's very much here that you're going to continuously have an income from farming the land, but you're also going to have a future income from growing good high quality broadleaf trees. This is the crops element, and then this is a new element that's out on a pilot scheme. It's called forest gardening, and this is all about creating organic food forests. I think this is limited to 1 hectare in size, but you will be putting in a variety of trees, from your canopy trees, your large trees that will have fruit and nuts. You'll have your smaller kind of lower tree level, your dwarf fruit trees. You'll have your shrub layer, which will have your currants and your berries. Your herbaceous layer, which will provide foraging. It also provides a lot of medicinal plants. Your ground cover crops, so you can be growing your carrots or your cabbage or whatever as well in certain areas. Your roots and your fungi, and also your vertical layer, which is your climbers and your vines. So this is all about creating little organic food forests, and we're hopefully going to be putting one of these in Dorla as well. So I think it's a great option, and they're piloting this to start it in sea, with about 6 or so sites a year. Then this is the open forest measure. Again, this might be of interest to a lot of the local authorities. This is all about creating neighbourhoods. So neighbourhoods are community woodlands. This is a project that we did in Ball in County Mayo. In Ball's situation, they were a community organisation who, when the local landlord left, they gifted all their lands to the local community. And with that came a huge amount of woodland, of different types of woodland. But in one particular area, there was over 30 acres of old woodland that had never been accessible, hadn't been managed, it was starting to degrade over time. And unfortunately, when we went into it, we were very much faced with this, an absolute sea of laurel throughout the woodland. Laurel and rhododendron, as you all know, are invasive species. I'm sure there's lots of local authority people here have serious budgets in trying to remove it. But there are two species that haven't learned to evolve really with other species and with nature. And they just take over the woodland. They don't allow any regeneration to happen. They don't allow anything else to flourish in the woodland. They take over, and certain amount of trees will get away, but they prevent the next generation from getting established and getting away. So basically your woodland will start to degrade and die over time. So we were faced with an absolute wall of this, and through the through the neighbourhood enhancement scheme, we went in and we cut and we chipped all this laurel and windrowed it into piles. Through the facilities element, we put in the paths. Here you see the tree shelters and the trees planted. So we planted a load of trees in, we put in a load of trails, we put in a tree trail, we put in picnic areas, we put in a fairy garden, and that whole area now is used all the time by the public. It's 30 acres of woodland that was heretofore never accessible, and because of the neighbourhood scheme, it's completely opened it up. And every time I go to it, I like the local community, there's something new in it every time I go. The community is adding to it itself, as well as the community group are putting in their own little bridges and paths. But I mean the people, every time I go to the fairy garden, there's new things in it. They're consistently adding to it over time, and it's wonderful to see. It really is a super scheme, the neighbourhood scheme. We also recently did, I do say to people, if they want, when you go out to Cloonamahon today now, you'll be looking at trees that are, some that are only up to my knee, and some a little bit, they're only just planted this year, so they're all little small trees. But we also did a wonderful project this year, 4 years ago at Mayo. Peter would know, Peter Gill from Mayo County Council. You might have heard of it at the time, Martin Neary Woodland Park. You might have seen him on the news. Martin Neary was the third man ever in Ireland to get planning permission to be buried on his own land.
Oh, yes,
yeah. And so he's gifted his land to the people of Ireland. He's in trust with Mayo County Council for a native woodland park to be created. So all his land, his 40 acres, have been planted in native woodland. And then on top of that, we put a neighbourhood scheme. So we put in the same paths and facilities and tree trails and opened it up. And it's on Google Maps. It's only 4 years old. And if you want to go and get an idea of what Cloonamahon will look like in 4 years, the trees, I'm already looking up at them. They're above me. They're really absolutely thriving. All the different woodland types are in there, and they're growing in their groups and mixtures. So I'd highly recommend people go to have a look at that if they want to see what it's like even just a few years down the line. You'd be surprised how quick it gets away and to take away. So there also is, in the new neighbourhood, they have a few extra measures. So the forest classroom measure, where there's funding there to encourage people to train as facilitators to go around and to do a whole forest educational piece around woodlands. There's heritage forests. So again, if you have areas of heritage or cultural significance in your forest, archaeological sites, you might have holy wells, you might have an area of pilgrimage, that you can get support if you want to open up these areas to provide access to them, to enhance them and improve them, to protect the woodland if you have stuff like this going on, and that it allows you to come in and open this. There's also what's called active forests and heartwood forests, which very much have a whole health and well-being aspect on them. I think one of them is I think the active forest is for the public sector, maybe the heartwoods is for private land. I'm not 100% sure because all the details of the schemes aren't out, but there is a lot of measures here in the open forest measure for the social, cultural and heritage forests, and this is for existing forests. So just very quickly, there's a couple of other measures that might be of interest to yourselves. Through the Sustainable Forest Management Intervention, there is funding there for running knowledge transfer groups. So this is all about peer-to-peer learning between forest owners. We ran 3 this year where we bring in groups of forest owners. We go to each other's sites, and it's all about learning and sharing skills in their forests and their management. And there'll be a call for training proposals, continuous professional development, There is a promotion aspect there to the Woodland Support Fund. So the Woodland Festival that we ran this year and these open days in Cloonamahon, we applied to the Woodland Support Fund to run these. And so there is funding support there for any kind of promotional project that promotes woodland creation and that promotes the management and which promotes basically getting people out into our forests, getting people educated in our forests, people learning about forests. So there is measures, and I think at the start of next year and maybe in the first quarter of next year, that Woodland Support Fund will be out again for funding proposals. And then finally, again, for any forest owners who are here, there is a new measure called climate resilient reforestation. It already existed actually for the native woodland, but if you were going in and you're clear felling your commercial forest, that there's support here if you want to reforest it a different way. So if you want to reforest it with continuous forestry in mind, so that you're going to come in with different species laid out different ways to manage it in a different system. If you want to reforest it for native woodland, or you want to reforest it for water and biodiversity, there's grant support there to help you with the additional costs of laying out this type of reforestation. And then also there'll be an additional premium payment, I don't know what the amount is, but that you will get a premium support there for 7 years, because you're forgoing some of your future commercial income because you're going to reforest your forest in a different way and look to managing it a different way. So that's me. I'm not going to go into questions now because I'm going to get Colin to come in, and Colin is just going to do his overview of the woodland and the operations we did, and then both myself and Colin will come up at the end and we'll be here for questions and answers, and when we have a cup of tea there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers as well. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're not getting overloaded too much. So my job is to overload you a little bit more, and I'll try to keep it as short as possible. My name is Colin Gilheany, Forest Manager of Western Forestry Co-op, and I was manager for this site here. So we just take a little bit of a journey, slightly different than what Marina was doing, from the concept to the implementation of the site. It's probably a mad thing to think that only 8 short months ago, if you were here on site, there wasn't a sign of anything like what you're going to see today. 100 acres of native woodland, paths, playground, benches for people to enjoy. Like, it's a wonderful thing. I still clearly remember the first day that Marina came to me. She said she had a little project for me. I knew well by the glint in her eye there was a good bit of work ahead of me, there was. And when I mapped it up, I realised that it was over 100 acres. I was wondering if there'd actually be a room here for me. I was going to be here so often. This is the hospital. This is where we are at the minute, or the centre as it now is. You came in the main driveway here. So a large section of the site is over here to the right. And then there's two kind of sections, this triangle kind of bit here, and then this long section down by the old farmyard and the walled garden. So that's kind of just an overview of the site. If anyone comes to me with a new inquiry, the first step for me is to do an online assessment. So the first thing I need to do is check for any particular maybe stumbling blocks to getting an approval on the site. So an online assessment, we do it through the IFR system. It's a system that's open to foresters, and basically there's loads of layers on it. Now I apologise how busy this site is. I have a load of layers thrown up at once here just to give you an idea. And I do realise it looks like something my child probably drew, but no, this is the real thing. Okay, some of the stuff that's on the site, you have the very straight lines, or like this one here, the purple lines and the yellow line there, they're all ESB lines. And if you have ESB going through your site, you can't plant, there's different size buffers that you can't, depending on the size of the line going through. The circles indicate some sort of archaeology feature. It could be different, and you can see this is the site here, so there's a few we had to take into account here, and here, which we'll talk about in a few more minutes. And then there's some potential wet spots, the likes of these here. I'll draw my attention to it when I go out onto site. Now the main thing here, of course, that we would have to take into account is SACs and NHAs, special areas of conservation or natural heritage areas. And if there's any of them within 15 kilometres of a proposed site, the site has to be assessed to see if it would have any potential impact once you plant the ground. So I know then that and if there is any, and you can see that the Unshin River one here is right beside us, and Knockmullen Fen is just up there. So this is definitely going to be ecology. And I see one of the ecologists, Alan, is here today, that actually would have looked at this when it came as far as I'm in the department. But even at this stage, a site this size, we would have decided to hire on an ecologist now to do a natural impact statement, just to help the process be as smooth as possible. So we would have brought an ecologist on board to do this for us, and would help the application go in and give the ecologist in the department more information from the start, and more likely to streamline the whole procedure. After the online assessment, the next step is the site assessment. Things we have to take into account are soil, elevation, land classification, like all ground vegetation has a score and charts, you can score it and you decide whether it's plantable or not. And even the trees and the hedgerows tells us a good bit about the site and what naturally might be there if it was left of its own devices. So from the feedback from the ecologist, and from different site visits with different people, Joe Gower and Woodlands of Ireland, Marina, we had several site visits on here. The plantable ground, then we assessed the soil based on what we had. Now, out of the scenarios available to us, we decided there was 3 scenarios here on the site. So first scenario we had was scenario 3, brown earths, still called oak, ash and hazel woodland, even though I'm sure you're aware there's no ash available to plant anymore. So it's typically a brown earth profile, well structured. We don't get to plant this type of ground too often, but more and more sites are becoming available, thankfully. We also have what's known as scenario 4, the alder, oak, ash woodland. Poorly drained, dobby, clay soil, very familiar. Anyone from the west, northwest, you're usually well familiar with this type of ground. And then the third type we had here was the pioneer birch woodland, scenario 5, which is more your peaty podzol type soil. So even just from a layman's point of view, brown earths means that the oak native woodland usually, or something, potentially a high percentage of oak. The jobby ground is the alder woodland normally, and the kind of more black soils, the peaty podzolic ground, is more towards the birch, the more suitable species. And you'll see when we go out in the ground that when you match up the right tree to match the right ground, that there's more chance that they'll jump out of the ground. I just put in some snips from the habitat maps from the NIS, and you can see that this is just some of the feedback I got before I made my application. So going from what I got from that, it would help me pick the species. So the blue indicates the improved grassland, the off green is kind of the wet grassland, and some of the retained habitats here. And then even on this one here, there's another part of the site, there's another retained habitat over here, not to scale. So look, once we make the application, I can put that in, and it helps the department then also make their decisions, because they have eyes on the ground effectively. And there's also recommendations there for water setbacks and the likes. Now, in relation to archaeology, there's a couple of archaeology features on site. I can never know in advance exactly what the department archaeologists will require for me to leave out. So I usually submit the application and I indicate that there's archaeology on site, and then they research it effectively. And then if the site gets approved, they'll come back with recommendations. So for example, in this case, and we will be walking up here later, you can see where there was a large ring fort here, and it's still clearly visible on the ground, so we get to see that. There was a 30-metre archaeology exclusion zone around that. There's a second one here, which is no longer visible on the ground, but we still had to leave it out, and they put in 40 metres from the centre to leave out. And then what they wanted as well was a 30-metre line of sight left between the two. So it'll be a lovely feature in the future, because there's trees here and up to here, and then there's a section here as well. Now, because this indicates, by the way, our path here in this section, I did get permission to bring it back through the line of sight, just because otherwise I would have had a very short path down here and you wouldn't have got the full value of that area. But because this was going through this section, I had to hire an archaeologist to monitor when the machine works was going there, just in case anything turned up. But luckily the archaeologist was required anyway on site, because up where you park there's another archaeology feature here. This is the boundary of the site. We'd be walking in here, and this whole area had to be monitored as well. So, but I wouldn't have known this information till after the approval came in. At this stage then, I have to submit the application form. There's a lot of maps, a lot of information goes in. I wouldn't have time to go through it all, but there's fencing maps, biodiversity maps, species maps, facilities map indicating where we want to put the paths, playground, the benches, all that kind of stuff, and then the application is submitted. It goes to the department then, and it's just a waiting game then to see how long it takes for an approval to come back. When it came back approved, as long as it's the right time of the year, you're free to proceed. And some of the site operations that was required for this site was fencing, new paths in a bridge, invert mounting, planting mixtures, playground and seating, and gates. Just some of the logistics that had to be sorted. And just to emphasise that, some of the main features, I've put them here. 100,000 trees. That's what was required to plant this site. They had to be sourced, and then we had to get someone to plant them, which is quite an incredible amount of work. Nearly 4 kilometres of new paths, and that's going through west of Ireland agricultural ground, not the easiest thing to achieve. And nearly 5 kilometres of deer fencing, in itself is a huge project. Now this shot here just shows a bit of an overview of part of the ground. I put this one in because we won't be walking up there. Lovely vista from here looking back across the mountains. This is some of the scenario 3 of the brown earths here on top of the hill. We can actually see them when you go outside here. You can see the hill over there. As it goes down here, it's some of the podzolic ground, PD podzolic, and then this is some of the habitat that's retained down here. Now this is a shot of some of the path, the gates and the fencing that's on site, and we'll actually be walking through this in a while. The gates were engineered and they were made in a local engineering place. They're engineered they're self-closing, so we just need to keep the deer out of sight if the young trees are going to get established. The fencing, you can see here that this is the H-frame, well known in the deer fencing, so it's instead of a normal strain or normal fence because of the height, this is how it's straight, any bends like you have there or at the end of a fencing line. They're 8 metres apart to the next post, and in the middle we put a 6-foot split post just to kind of help tie in the wire. But once again, I'll show you that out on site. This is European larch that was sourced by our harvesting team. It was processed locally. They make great steaks. They're 3 metres long with about 1 metre of them going into the ground. They're kill and dried, and they're treated, and they're excellent for rot resistance and fungal resistance. So hopefully they're for a long time to come yet. This is just an overview. If you remember the shot I showed you of the archaeology there a while ago, there's one of the ring forts there. Second one is here, but it's not obvious. And you can see the way that we bent the path around to come back, and it's coming exactly through. So that had to be done fairly exactly. And you can see just some of the ground prep that's going on there at the time. That's just last spring. Now, in relation to ground preparation, our preferred choice is invert mounting. Me, pit planting, it really is hard to get trees established if you're pit planting. Invert mounting is a far better way of going. There's no drains in pit planting, so it's just literally the machine is picking up the sod and putting it back into the same place. This is part of the scenario 3, so it's the 2 metres apart by 1.5. The invert mound, it raises the tree slightly. It loosens the soil, gives the young tree a chance to get established, and it gives it a head start on weeds and grass before they start populating the mound. And it's not to be underestimated how much it helps the planter as well, because the planter has also come along here with maybe 6 different species, and he's trying to follow a certain planting plan. But if he also had to decide where exactly the tree's going, it would slow him down no end. So even for him planting and for the maintenance in the first year or so, it's a great help to him. And then that mound will sink back into the same spot, like literally in a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, even less nearly. You won't even know that there was something, lifted up out of the ground. So it's just our preferred choice. This is an overview then of nearly the same shot you seen earlier of the scenario 3 ground. This is that the path's gone in and the mounds are here, all done, waiting to be planted. A man once said to me not that long ago, the day the spade was gone. Well, 100 years ago, it was a spade used to plant trees, and it's still a spade today. So I'd like to give thanks to the planting team that planted this site, 100,000 trees, So I think they deserve great credit. And this is not them. This is Marina, Minister Pippa Hackett, I'm sure you recognise. Martin Byrne, who did work for the HSE, but we liked him so much we stole him for ourselves. He's now an employee of Western Forestry Co-op. Brian Quilcha, myself, and Dennis, who's the manager here. And between the 6 of us, we managed to get about 1 tree planted, I think, for the turning of the sod, and we were tired after that. I think we went for coffee. This is the real deal here. And I'd like to give special thanks to Liam and Frank, Frank's our foreman of 37 years. He's actually planted some sites that have been cut down, and he's planted them again. He's done so much work. Trojan man, that only for him we could do all the applications we want, but if we didn't have people like this to do the actual hard graft, none of this would happen. And of course, let's not forget Darcy. Darcy makes sure that the breaks are no longer than they should be, and all the planting mixtures are correct. She's very exact with all that kind of stuff. Here's an overview of the finished playground. We'll be seeing it in a short while, and I'm sure that so far, this is our 5th one of these meetings, by the way, so you'll see this here. There's been people have been on the monkey bars, so we need a few contenders to see who can beat Martin. No one has bet him yet. So you can see what we have there. We have some of the benches, one of the information signs, some of the seats, and hopefully in the future they'll extend further into this as they go. At this stage then, the site is, the groundworks is completed, and then it goes into the paperwork side of things. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with all that, but know that it's a mammoth undertaking, because you have the precision maps, you have the invoices, you have the provenance certs, and the Form 2 for here was 137 pages, so not for the faint-hearted. So our cameraman that's behind you, actually, he deserves full credit for that. But if he wasn't standing there, I'd probably take the credit for it, but he is standing right there. And then the next stage of the site, of course, is future management. A lot of this is already ongoing. So the trees were planted last spring. Grass cleaning and spot spraying has already taken part out on site. We'll talk about that when we are on site. It's essential just to get the trees going. Filling in is replacing failures over time. We have no filling in to do this winter because we've been on the ball here. Everything's flying. There's very few failures. Great to see. It's crucial to keep the deer fence monitored. If they get in, they do a lot of damage in a site like this, and of course they can be trapped in nearly then, so we need to monitor that as going forward. And then you'll progress on to maybe pruning, tinning for wood production, and manage other CCF. Everyone has the option that plants native woodland, to get timber out of their site in time to come if they want to. They can do it for firewood, they can have individual trees. That's just an option that's also available to everybody. Marina had already covered native woodland benefits, but I think that we'll all agree during COVID people got out in the woods way more than we probably had beforehand. So, whether anxiety, stress, depression, everyone knows is out there so bad these times, that, there's huge benefits of places like this, and we're getting lots of compliments from the local people who are enjoying it already. And I'd just like to finish on this slide. Old Irish oak woodlands, we all know that they covered large parts of the country in the past. It's only when people are brave and put in sites like this for planting and on ground that's suitable that we know that we can be achieving something here that will be here for thousands of years to come, hopefully, for the benefit of all of us and the planet. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Colin. So we've 10 minutes or so for, no time it is yet, for questions and answers. If anybody's any questions.
Colin, what kind of deer have you got here?
None, thankfully.
Put the fence up for
we have snipers, we have towers, we have guns out there. They're not far away. Do you know what I mean? There actually was 1 or 2 I think being on site before. I didn't see them, but I seen their tracks.
Red deer, is it? Or?
No, it's probably fallow, is it? Or I haven't seen them. I wouldn't be an expert in them, but there is deer is a major problem. You know what I mean, in the area, and there was a few footprints before we got the gates on.
All times.
Yeah. So
All times of the day, probably.
yeah, I think they're all in the area potentially, but it is a big concern for there's great deal of money out there, premiums for native woodlands, but if they don't increase the deer fencing rates, it can be a problem getting sites protected. A big site like this, you have enough allowance, but if you have a smaller site, you're in real bother.
Is the rewilding grant available to local authorities?
The emergent woodland, well there is actually, so in the Native Woodland Conservation Scheme, there was an emergent woodland grant support that was available through the Native Woodland Conservation Scheme. So I would imagine that that's there as well, but that's for emergent woodland. So you would have to be having like your hawthorns and your birch or your hazel, your willows. You know, would have to have a certain amount of them, and you literally got support to help manage that woodland. And a lot of it is for fencing off really and letting nature do her own thing, maybe with a small bit of supplementary underplanting with succession species. But under the Native Woodland Conservation Scheme, definitely it is. Under the forest creation types, I'd say it can be probably built in some way to the woodland creation.
Do you know for the BIS payments, if a farmer decides to plant his whole farm, will he continue or does he have to continue farming?
In the old rules, and I don't know what it is in the new cap, it was you had to have 3 hectares. You could plant everything up to 3 hectares. Anyone, Victor, do you know? No,
they removed that rule
The
there
3
about
hectares.
3 years ago, so you can plant to 100% of your eligible EPS or PIS area. Now, it's obviously under the new cap, so we don't know the full BIS rules yet, but I think it'll be very similar to what, if not identical to what we have. So yes, you could plant, and there's no need to continue farming.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, no.
Could I ask Marina, sorry, just on that native, what's it called, the NTA, the native tree area?
Scheme, yeah.
Do we know what the establishment grants are?
No, they haven't released the grant
Okay.
rates. Now, a lot of the scheme details is there, but the grant rates haven't been released. But it is at a different stocking. I think it's a 3 by 3 metre. So the stocking is a lot less in the native tree area scheme. So the minimum in any other native forest is 2 by 2. Sorry, that's about 2,500 stems to the hectare. So it's probably around the 1,800 stems in the native tree area scheme. And I think there might be a bit of variability within that, because we do try to, I think it's important to try and maybe increase the density in some areas and then widen it out in others to kind of create as much of a natural woodland as we can through artificial means.
Are there any inspectors here by any chance? Any of the forestry inspectors?
No, not at the moment,
No.
not today, no. But Alan is with us. Alan's an
No,
ecologist.
it's just one of my colleagues texted me there, and knew I was here, and he was asking, we've had a number of inquiries about the Forest for Water scheme and whether or not farmers will be allowed to plant in areas that flood.
Well, there is a new scenario 6 coming out of the native woodland scheme called wet woodlands. So that's very much aimed at areas with higher water tables and species that are more adaptable to those type of environments and soils. And Joe Garrow was actually here this morning, he's not here now, but so there is a whole wet woodland option under the native woodland scheme. So I think it will, but
Within reason.
within reason,
Yeah.
absolutely, you know.
What would be in that? Alders and willows?
Probably alders and willows, yeah. You know, species that can tolerate high water levels. Those two in particular are quite good. Maybe, you know, maybe a bit of oak on the higher areas, you know. But yeah, I don't have the details of scenario 6. We've only got scenario 1 to 5, so I don't know what it. But I would imagine it's kind of a wet willow, alder, car type woodland.
You mentioned there was 6 pilot areas for the forest garden scheme. And do you know how many of you where they are? They are urban or
Oh no,
rural?
so they're allowing up to 6 pilots a year is the target.
Okay.
So they set out targets in the scheme document. I don't know if they, you know, but they basically, I suppose, if it's oversubscribed, they have to look at their funding every year, their budgets. So they said they're allowed, it's kind of a pilot scheme that there's up to 6 pilots a year over the 5 years, so there's 30 can be created, let's say.
Okay.
But if the funding isn't being maxed in other schemes, it can be transferred to these areas if there's enough interest and uptake, I would say. But no, there's none, we don't even have, I don't even know what the terms and conditions are of it yet, I haven't got the details, just the high level information.
Do the residents use the?
Yeah, the staff. Well, no, so there's very little residents here. They've all been, so the HSE has basically moved, I'd say, in excess of 90% of the residents out to the community. So they're all out in community housing. So there's some, but it's mainly all offices here, but the staff use it a lot, yeah, they use it all the time.
But no, one resident that is here, I know he's on it regularly because
Yeah.
they're telling me they can't get him off it. He
Yeah.
wants to keep circling, you know, and like so he's doubling it, like, you know.
We had a man here last week, he's about 3 miles away, he's 87 years of age, and he comes here 4 times a week. And he comes here all the time, and he actually came to the open day because unknown to us, there was people in here shooting, and he wanted to let us know is there anything we could do. So we're going to, they shouldn't be in there shooting, they weren't given permission, but we just go through the whole public notification. Now it is a wildlife reserve, it's not for shooting, but that was his whole mission of coming here that day. Which is great. Like the local people are really enjoying it and really invested, but it's a secret treasure to them because apparently Union Wood is really busy, so I don't want anyone to know about Cloonamahon, is what I've been finding out, yeah.
So is this the main entrance then to get into it? Do you come here?
Yeah. You come, so where you drove up, where you parked your car to the left over there at the grotto, that's where we're going to start the walk from. So that's the car park, and then the entrance to the park is there.
And anyone, it's open?
Open to the public, yeah. It's open and available for everyone. You'll see it now when we do the walk.
Just don't mess with my trees. Stay on the path.
Marina, there's no premium paid for this project, is there?
No, because it's state lands.
Okay.
So state bodies aren't eligible for a premium. It's the state paying the state.
Yeah.
No, there's no.
That would be the same for County Council or anything?
Yeah, any state, yeah. You get the grant, so you get the grant support to do it, but no premium support.
And there's funding there for technical support as well, so all the technical costs, such as the forest and all that's paid.
Yeah, under the grant, but scale comes into that feature. So I suppose for if you've only got 1 hectare, it's going to be very hard to put facilities because there's a maximum grant. So there's a maximum grant for the facilities of, let's say, I think the old scheme was €3,800 a hectare. That would suck up paths in no time. So you have to, when we looked at here, we had a budget of the 40 hectares by that, and we basically then worked out how much path we could get in, how many seats and benches. So scale will add to it, absolutely.
Yeah, but from local authority point of view, oftentimes to get the project underway, you need that technical ability to get the grant. And if that's what it is in a lot of the forestry schemes, if that provision is made, it means you have a shovel-ready project without any cost incurred to the local authority or whoever the state agent is.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big advantage of all these schemes.
Grab a cup of tea.
Yeah, so we'll just go down the back, we'll have a cup of tea and biscuit, and then we're going to head out to the park in about 15 minutes or so. You